All right, so I decided to use a beta version of software to create a slide deck and non-slide deck software in about an hour. So we'll see how this goes. Who here has actually heard of Framer? Okay, we've got about very few hands. That's okay. Figma design? Okay. Generally, the idea that design tools are going online or an online first experience. Who's kind of aware of that trend? All right, so we have a lot of ground to cover. I'll try and go through this quickly. Framer is, as I described it here, is basically React and Sketch had a baby. Who's heard of React? I mean, who's heard of React? Come on, let's actually see hands of who's heard of React. Okay, good. Awesome, and who's heard of Sketch? Okay, so imagine now if you take the ability to have a code framework and you tie that with a design tool, this is what you get in the end. And I'm going to go through here some examples, and I don't actually have an arrow key because it's an application built in Framer. A little bit about me. I'm a developer advocate for Graph CMS. I'm a husband and father, which means I'm qualified to make terrible jokes. And I try to be a really nice guy most of the time. I'm an American, so I talk really fast in English. So if I'm going too fast, like just give me some emergency signs, I'll slow down and try to repeat. All right, what is Framer? It's design plus code. What do I mean by that? So this is actually a Framer project, so this is a layout, but now it has an idea of application state, so I could actually have like a toggle button, and it's able to pass in, say, a dark mode or a light mode. I can switch that back and forth. It's an ability to tie in the idea of application and design in one tool to communicate with developers what we intended. So what does Framer mean then for designers? Basically, a little bit of code goes a long way. You take your design, you spice it up with a little bit of code, like something about dynamic data or opacity that might be tied to a slider, and then you can get a lot more powerful way to represent what you want that to look like as a final product. What that looks like for developers is that you're able to close the feedback loop. Because it's actually React under the hood, whatever you develop in React could be re-imported back inside of Framer so that a designer makes some iterations on design. They give you the React code, you make it proper to your guys' coding patterns, ship it back to the designer, and you can actually have a full circle here where you're able to have the designer and developer working in tandem on the same concept. So there's some basic concepts behind this. Basically, you have the idea of layouts, which is pretty common. So you have like frames and this round idea. It's essentially a frame with built-in radius. I don't know why they have two separate terms, but that's their thing. They're basically divs. They're nothing fancier than that. You can add all the same styling to that as you would want to. We'll look at some examples of it. You have directed layout, so this is an example of 3 boxes that are inside of what's called a stack, and this is the ability to have like, let's say, flexbox directives. I'm going to go ahead and hop back into the application here, or into the application for the first time and show you how we would change that. So if I come over to the application and find a layout here, you can see this is pretty similar to what we would expect from Sketch. And if I select this component that was this directed layout, and I change this, instead of saying space evenly, I wanted to have it be maybe space between. So now I have that automatically directed layout. Hop back over to the preview, and inside of my live version, I have that directed layout. So really powerful concept for getting things tight on grid. It is Flexbox under the hood. So whatever you're showing to a developer that you want to look like this, it's completely possible. This is actual like production code. Need to hop back out real quick because I'm out of the layout. We are using that one. All right, so skip, skip, skip. All right, so we have the directed layouts. Then you have some more built-in components inside of Framer. You have what they have called the scroll box. So you could give it a couple of elements where you want to have it, say, scrolling inside of an individual window. Pretty useful for conveying any kind of a iOS or mobile layout. You have a page component, so you could actually flip between individual frames. Again, comes with, this is pre-built by Framer, so these are common patterns that you would expect to see in a layout tool. Oh, I'm not there yet. I am there yet. Okay, good. All right, so you have design components. So this is a button. You create a component. This is pretty common in most design tools today inside of Figma, inside of Sketch. This is simply color override and text override. And everything else is shared based off of a master element. And then you have what they are called override components. So this is where you start to sprinkle in just a little bit of code. So here I have a nice button, and I want to show a developer what I mean for the interaction on it. And I can actually give them a real-time example. If we were to pop out of here, I'm just going to lock this real quick so I can come back easier. If I were to hop out of there and go to that actual button here, I'm going to go ahead and examine the code. And they have a built-in IDE inside of Framer, which is super powerful. You can see that I just simply say that, as this is a React code, if I were to say, while I'm tapping the device, go ahead and adjust the scale to 0.6 and adjust the rotation by 8 degrees. Moving back to the component, that's what I get. Really simple code to actually produce. That's something that any designer could actually get their mind around and is able to create very realistic elements because, again, we are shipping code back and forth. And then they have the idea of code components, which becomes really powerful. This is actually provided by Mapbox. You can get this from the store inside of Framer. The store is actually at the moment all free components, but it's community powered. They create components that I think I can find useful. So Mapbox is a great example. This is a design tool. This is kind of like Sketch. And I can real time click on the side here inside of an input. I'll go ahead and search up Zurich. I mean, that's trying to see Sketch do that. Like, that's pretty darn powerful. How's it look in dark mode? Nice. All right. So the cherry on top that I find, the reason why I kind of give this talk is because I work for Graph CMS, a headless CMS. What becomes powerful then is that because you have the ability to combine code and design, you can work with real-time data. So this here is actually data pulled in from Graph CMS. This is quote-unquote production real data brought inside of your design tool to actually prototype with and test with. Facebook was very popular for kicking off this idea of designing with real data because they were having a problem where basically all the Facebook designers were working with beautiful people and like really nice, easy names, you know, Jeff or John. And then they came across names like my grandfather, like Johannes Panos Marjanian. It doesn't fit so well inside of a small design box, and it breaks in very unnatural places. So when you talk about bringing in real-world data into your application, you can actually see what things would look like. And it's a very, very powerful concept. I'm trying to check my time here. I'm actually doing perfect on time. So I've gone really fast through to cover over the basic ideas. I'm going to step back into the application here and show you guys a little bit more what it looks like. And we'll probably even have some time for questions. So I'm crushing it. It's great. All right, so what I described here, we have inside of the layout. I'm just going to make this a little big so you don't see my weird desktop. Is that actually big enough? Can I zoom? I don't know if I can zoom in there.
Change the resolution.
No, I can't. The resolution I could, yeah, but you guys see it okay? Can you see it enough? You get the idea? Good enough? Okay. If somebody has a problem, you can come up and ask me, and we'll see what we can do about it.
Just in case it's recorded in HD. So.
Oh, perfect. All right. So on the sidebar here, you have the tools palette. So this is what I was talking about your frames. If you're a designer, then you're going to be used to these inside of Sketch or Figma. These are common ideas that you find there. For a developer's thinking, these are divs, basically. Then you have standard text tool, nothing breaking the mold there as far as creativity. Then you have stack, which is this tool here that allows you to use flexbox spacing, space evenly, tell it how you want to align, center. Again, it's a very powerful tool. It's fairly common in a lot of layout tools these days, like Sketch, but because this is actually true flexbox 100%, then it's able to be reproduced exactly. Nothing that you can do here could not be done inside of very simple and browser-supported code. So you have the stack tool on the side here. We have linking. If we were to scroll down here, I were to scroll down here, there we go. Oh, I actually had missed a button, but you can actually have buttons linking in between frames. So if I were to click on that button, it would have taken me back up to this real-world data slide. I have the scroll component, which is what we had already seen with this one here, where you can scroll through the content. And then we have the paging component. I'm going to go ahead and show you what the actual code components look like then. So this is standard layers, and they're named terribly. So this is like a real-world example, because this is what a lot of layer handoffs look like. If you have seen them before, I apologize. I've sent those to developers. Here's the components. So you can see where I brought in Mapbox, and that's a really nice tool. They have a lot of once they shipped with it. Here's my real-world data component. I'm going to go ahead and look at the code on that, actually. And so real-world data, as standard React code. I'm going to try and break this down a little bit what's happening. So has anybody ever not looked at React code? Okay. So are you familiar with node code, like JavaScript code in general? Okay. Sorry. Ask me questions later if you're curious. Basically, you have your imports up here, so standard React stuff, and then you're bringing in this design element. We can actually cover that here. So this is a design component from the canvas. If I were to zoom back out to my canvas here, I've defined this component right here as being my master. And then I called it mountain inside of my layers palette. So inside of code, I'm able to import that mountain code component. And then I'm using React hooks here. So has anybody used React hooks yet? They're relatively new. A couple people, one person. React hooks, good. It's essentially React standard lifecycle elements, but just a little bit more simplified. So use effect is the concept of component did mount and component did update. Wrapped up into one so that you don't have to try to write a whole bunch of excess boilerplate. This is a fetch request going to the GraphCMS API, and it's bringing in some mountains here and then sending this data into my state. And that state gets looped over underneath inside of my render function here, and I'm passing in the props to the mountain component. Is everybody here completely confused, or are you following? Confused? Following? Okay, if you're on the confused side, just ask me afterwards. I'm happy to describe it. So I'm taking this mountain component, passing in the props that I've defined on it as being possible. There's extra data that I have available from GraphCMS. I have actually an elevation property. I'm going to go ahead and actually just define that back in my code component, or my design component, sorry. So if I go ahead and grab this guy, I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit, a lot of it. I'm going to add an elevation, and that now needs to be passed out as a general override. So we're going to go ahead and call it there. Layer. All right, so here I have the actual master component inside of my layers palette. This is why you name your layers. I'm going to go ahead and call this elevation. What's that? Frame. All right, it's a brand repetition strategy, actually. Okay, so we have elevation heading back over to my code, and I'm going to tell my element here that you can expect a new property called elevation, and we're going to go ahead and pass in the elevation property. All right, so if I go back over to that to the code here, you can see that I now have access to the elevation properties coming in. So passing in real world data and matches really well. It's one of the powers actually of GraphQL, which is why we enjoy using that as a headless CMS, is that it's a very descriptive syntax for describing the data you're asking from the server. That's literally how you're asking data from the headless CMS. So you can see very easily what values are coming back. It maps really well in a design context. And yeah, it's really a powerful concept here. So I'd like to show you what code looks like, show you what an override looks like. I think then I actually do have about 10 minutes left. So let's actually open up to questions then, because I think I covered a lot of stuff really, really, really fast. So who actually has a question? Okay.
Yeah, I would ask, so it's like, it seems powerful, but what would you actually use it for? Like, what are your ideas after already working with it?
Yeah, basically it's finishing the idea of the code, the design to developer handoff. They have all the same pen tools, they have the graphics tools. I didn't actually show you guys the graphic tool, but they have an ability to use standard SVG shapes. It's essentially replacing Sketch entirely. And then you have the ability to overlay that with also interaction design. And so you're able to indicate from start to finish really what the vision was. How does that drop-down behave? Is this a springy animation? Is this something that's going to be a full frame? Does it fill out from the center to the outside? These are all elements that create kind of feelings of brand and these feelings of personality in our design that oftentimes get lost in translation. And so this is why I would actually just completely replace something like Framer or Figma and just drop that right in. If you still, not Framer, replace Sketch or Figma and drop that in place. If you want to start with Sketch, because people are fast in that and people have experience with that, you can actually import both Sketch and Figma into Framer. So if you want to start in Sketch, by all means do that. Bring it in and then describe your interactions, describe your application flow. You can see that it actually maps pretty nicely if you're trying to show the behavior of what we'd expect. Like, okay, so we have this leads to that, and you get the nice ability to kind of diagram it and see what screens are connected and what behavior goes from where to where. Yeah. Does that answer the question? You might disagree, but
how usable is it today? Like, what would you use it? Like, would you use it for like production project where you work on? Like, maybe start from a Sketch, import it, and try it on production stuff?
Yeah, so I wouldn't ship the code from Framer into production. I would use that as a way to basically highly inform the developers on what this should actually be.
Would it be maybe usable, I don't know, to showcase, to bring to customer more interactive?
Yeah.
Like a prototype of application?
Yeah, he actually uses it in production.
Yeah, basically you can prototype very quickly anything you want, with or without code. You can prototype from apps, web apps, websites, like anything that has a UI, you can prototype in Framer. And they have very nice previews with like devices, and you can put hands and stuff, so you can actually show like an iPhone, an Android phone, or a MacBook, and you have your prototype running.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the idea of it. How many times has a designer tried to explain what they intended for the hamburger menu, how it to behave? Okay, well, I want the top two to cross over and the middle one to actually shrink in the middle or to pop out to the side. I mean, for developers, like, seriously? Like, you want to talk about how the hamburger pops? Like, this is not the time for this conversation, but it allows the designer, because it's actually a really important part of the experience, to be able to describe this without having to try and just sit there and explain it to a developer. They can actually show exactly what they want it to be, and then the developer is able to create it in a very efficient, coded way. And that's basically kind of finishing that bit of disconnect where they can say, this is how I want it to look, and then the developer goes in and goes, oh yeah, I understand how that's supposed to work because I see the code translation. This is production code, like this is real code. So they can say, we have a Vue app, but I can definitely see how this works in React and bring it over to Vue or to Angular or whatever else they may have. Any other questions?
Does it run on an Electron, or how does it work?
I'm guessing Electron. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's written with JavaScript.
Yeah. Yeah, so this here is the beta version of Framer X. They do have a stable release of Framer X. It's, the beta's got some cool new tools, but there is some bugs in there, so I would definitely recommend if you're going to be bringing it into your cycle today, definitely go with the stable release. I mean, standard beta rules apply. Yeah, it's really, I find it quite the powerful way to describe your content from one person to the next. When you're talking about, I used to be a brand guy. I guess once a brand guy, always a brand guy. When you're talking about the way that an app feels and behaves, this is part of the design language you're trying to communicate. It's not just colors, it's not just typography. It's how do I transition from this screen to that screen? How does the menu fly out? These are all the nuances that we're now able to describe inside of a design tool that before we were kind of limited to moving a piece of paper slowly up a whiteboard and trying to translate that to an animation. And this brings back a lot of power to the developer. Any more questions? So I do have one last thing. All right, so we are putting on the GraphQL Day Bodensee conference. GraphQL Day is a conference that happens worldwide, and it's a one-day event where GraphQL experts from all around the world come together and talk about it. Usually they gravitate towards tech centers like Berlin or Toronto, and I say, we're going to bring one into the south here. So it's going to be on Bodensee and Constance, so we're going to try and really go after people that are in the kind of Munich, Stuttgart, Zurich, that kind of Switzerland, Austria, and southern Germany demographic. We would love to have speakers from this area actually sign up. So the call for papers is now officially open. You can go to papercall.io and just look for, I think probably just Bodensee. We're the only conference happening. We can have speakers of all levels. So if you have some experience with GraphQL or are interested in that as a technology, we would absolutely love to have you submit a paper and come talk and meet some pretty cool people. Yeah, that's it.